Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you deepen in your connection with your angels and your divine guidance, and also invites you to rest, relax, and fall asleep. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And in my waking hours, you can find me offering one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes at illuminating-souls.com. And as part of my self-care over the past few years, I have been listening to sleep podcasts, and they have really become an essential part of my well-being. I started off by listening to Andrew Ackerman's Sleep With Me, which is wonderful. And then I also found my way to Otis Gray's Sleepy, as well as a podcast called Get Sleepy. Can you sense the theme here? And especially over the past 2 years, I have found myself going to bed earlier and earlier. I think it must be one of the ways it helps to keep my energy clear. You know, when we're sleeping, it is a really powerful time for restoration, body, mind, and spirit. We get to unplug our consciousness, and we get to replenish. So for me, bedtime has become a sacred time of day. I love the feeling of experiencing sleep starting to come upon me. I think my eyes start to droop. My husband always laughs because he sees it starting to come over me. And I struggle against it because I want to stay up a little longer. But I have learned that when that sense of fatigue comes over me, it means it's time to crawl into bed and put on a podcast and call it a day. And for me, bedtime is a cozy time. There is something about crawling underneath the comforter that feels like sanctuary. And I hope wherever this message finds you right now, that somehow the angels and I can help you experience a sense of sanctuary right now, here, too. As I make this recording for you, I am underneath the blanket fort, which is the blanket I throw over my monitor and my head to help dampen the sound as I record. I am wearing super cozy, soft clothes that feel like I'm walking around in a blanket. And so I very much am in the spirit of snuggly, cozy energy with you. And so together, we're going to invite in the angels and cultivate a sense of sacred, restful sanctuary for you. So I invite you to take some nice deep breaths in and out, allowing your breath to grow deeper Intellectually, it always sounds funny to invite you to take in a breath because we breathe all the time. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But there's a world of difference between the regular, everyday breath and that deep, intentional breath. Those deep breaths that we lean into create a gateway for us to more deeply connect with divine love. So in this moment, I invite you to expand your lungs and breathe in deeply, and then exhale. And as you do, with your permission, the angels will bring their energy more closely to you. And if you're new to the world of angels, I know you've heard of angels before, but maybe you're wondering, what do they have to do with this podcast? Well, for the past 17 years of my life, I have been cultivating a deep relationship with the angels. They are divine messengers of light. They are celestial beings who are the embodiment of divine love. And we all have them. They are not associated with any specific religion or spiritual path. They simply exist with us, just as the sun does. And the love that they embody is the kind of love that really nurtures us. Think of divine love as the elixir of light and the antidote to everything. This is not the kind of love you need to earn or that can ever be taken from you. This love exists because you do. You are a divine being in human form. You are the embodiment of the breath of God that has incarnated as you. You are worthy of a beautiful life, and we are here to support you. So as you move more deeply into rest, I'm going to call the angels in now. They're already here. But I love the opportunity to intentionally connect with them. So beautiful angels on high, we invite you to be here now. I ask that you create a beautiful, intentional energy field that is supportive of a good night's rest. Angels, will you please infuse this space with waves of love and healing, so that each of us may be replenished and restored into the brightness of our spirit. Angels, we ask that you clear away anything that does not belong to us, and that you clear away anything that feels heavy that we are not required to carry. Please lift up that which feels like a burden, knowing that to you it is likely as light as a feather. And bring to us that beautiful alchemy that allows us to flow into a lightness of spirit as we remember more deeply who we truly are as a blessing from on high. So, dear ones, just take a nice deep breath in and give yourself permission to receive. There is nothing you need to do in this moment. Simply allow the waves of light and love to wash over you. And know that the angels know what you need. The angels know you intimately. They are aware of all that is transpiring in your life. And now that you have invited them to join you here, they are bringing you healing light. If it helps you to visualize, you can imagine that you are being transported to a beautiful healing temple, and you are greeted by your angels who love you so, and one of your healing guides is with you, helping to balance your energy field and fill your heart with love. This is a visualization I often use for myself and others, and it always brings me such a deep state of peace. Simply receive the healing light. The lovely thing about this is we don't need to know what is up for healing. God knows, the angels know. They know your prayers. They know the intimacies of your heart and your mind. And they are here now to support and help you. We invite you to call in the beauty of your soul. We invite you to call in the goodness and the blessings that are here for you. We affirm that there are blessings that are being seeded upon your path that will come into your awareness over the coming days and weeks. May you find grace upon your path. May you be met by those who love you, appreciate you, and celebrate you. May you feel a wonderful sense of magic within and around you as you remember more of who you are and the brightness of your soul. And take another breath in and out, and you have permission to drift off. What is so wonderful about these energies is you need not be conscious to receive them. Quite often, coming into the higher energy fields actually can make us sleepy, because one of the best ways to receive these energies is to zone out. So if you find yourself feeling tired, it's okay to go to sleep. And while you are sleeping, the angels will watch over you. And I'm also going to say a prayer that when it is time for you to wake up, you can wake up feeling refreshed and feeling more yourself. I am so deeply grateful for the opportunity to be here with you now. May love surround you always. And that healing guide we had you visualize in the healing temple, they will remain with you too. I ask them to continue bringing healing to you that is steeped with divine grace. And while you rest, I am going to read to you. And tonight we're going to return to Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. And I was trying to remember where we left off, and I realized we left off a few pages into chapter 4. And so I'm going to start the chapter over again. I hope that's okay with you. So we are starting with chapter 4, Burdens. Oh dear, how hard it does seem to take up our packs and go on, sighed Meg the morning after the party. For now the holidays were over. The week of merrymaking did not fit her for going on easily with the task she never liked. I wish it was Christmas or New Year's all the time. Wouldn't it be fun? Answered Jo, yawning dismally. We shouldn't enjoy ourselves half as much as we do now, but it does seem so nice to have little suppers and bouquets and go to parties and drive home and read and rest and not work. It's like other people, you know, and I always envy girls who do such things. I am so fond of luxury, said Meg, trying to decide which of the two shabby gowns was the least shabby. Well, we can't have it, so don't let us grumble, but shoulder our bundles and trudge along as cheerfully as Marmee does. I'm sure Aunt March is a regular old man of the sea to me, but I suppose when I've learned to carry her without complaining, she will tumble off or get so light that I shan't mind her. The idea tickled Jo's fancy and put her in good spirits, but Meg didn't brighten, for her burden consisted of 4 spoiled children, seemed heavier than ever. She had not heart enough to even make herself pretty as usual by putting on a blue neck ribbon and dressing her hair in the most becoming way. Where's the use of looking nice when no one sees me but those cross little ones, and no one cares whether I'm pretty or not, she muttered, shutting her drawer with a jerk. I shall have to toil and moil all my days with only little bits of fun now and then, and get old and ugly and sour because I'm poor and can't enjoy my life as other girls do. It's a shame. So Meg went down wearing an injured look, and wasn't at all agreeable at breakfast time. Everyone seemed rather out of sorts and inclined to croak. Beth had a headache and lay on the sofa trying to comfort herself with the cat and 3 kittens. Amy was fretting because her lessons were not learned, and she couldn't find her rubbers. Jo would whistle and make a great racket getting ready. Mrs. March was very busy trying to finish a letter which must go at once, and Hannah had the grumps for being up late didn't suit her. There never was such a cross family, cried Jo, losing her temper when she had upset an inkstand, broken both boot-lacings, and sat down upon her hat. You're the crossest person in it, returned Amy, washing out the sum that was all wrong with the tears that had fallen on her slate. Girls, do be quiet 1 minute. I must get this off by the early mail, and you drive me distracted with your worry, cried Mrs. March, crossing out the third spoiled sentence in her letter. There was a momentary lull broken by Hannah, who stalked in, laid 2 hot turnovers on the table, and stalked out again. These turnovers were an institution, and the girls called them muffs, for they had no others, and found the hot pies very comforting to their hands on cold mornings. Hannah never forgot to make them, no matter how busy or grumpy she might be, for the walk was long and bleak. The poor things got no other lunch and were seldom home before 2. Cuddle your cats and get over your headache, Bethy. Goodbye, Marmee. We are a set of rascals this morning, but we'll come home regular angels. Now then, Meg. And Joe tramped away, feeling that the pilgrims were not setting out as they ought to. They always looked back before turning the corner, for their mother was always at the window to nod and smile and wave her hand to them. Somehow it seemed as if they couldn't have gotten through the day without that, for whatever their mood might be, the last glimpse of that motherly face was sure to affect them like sunshine. If Marmee shook her fist instead of kissing her hand to us, it would serve us right, for more ungrateful wretches than we are we've never seen, cried Joe, taking a remorseful satisfaction in the snowy walk and bitter wind. Don't use such dreadful expressions, replied Meg from the depths of the veil in which she had shrouded herself like a nun sick of the world. I like good strong words that mean something, replied Joe, catching her hat as it took a leap off her head, preparing to fly away altogether. Call yourself any names you like, but I am neither a rascal nor a wretch, and I don't choose to be called so. You are a blighted being and decidedly cross today because you can't sit in the lap of luxury all the time. Poor dear, just wait till I make my fortune and you shall revel in carriages and ice cream and high-heeled slippers and posies and red-headed boys to dance with. How ridiculous you are, Joe. But Meg laughed at the nonsense and felt better in spite of herself. Lucky for you I am, for if I put on crushed airs and tried to be dismal as you do, we should be in a nice state. Thank goodness I can always find something funny to keep me up. Don't croak any more, but come home jolly, there's a dear. Joe gave her sister an encouraging pat on the shoulder as they parted for the day, each going a different way, each hugging her little warm turnover and trying to be cheerful in spite of wintry weather, hard work, and the unsatisfied desires of pleasure-loving youth. When Mr. March lost his property in trying to help an unfortunate friend, the 2 oldest girls begged to be allowed to do something toward their own support at least. Believing that they could not begin too early to cultivate energy, industry, and independence, their parents consented, and both fell to work with a hearty good will which, in spite of all obstacles, is sure to succeed at last. Margaret found a place as a nursery governess and felt rich with her small salary. As she said, she was fond of luxury, and her chief trouble was poverty. She found it harder to bear than the others because she could remember a time when home was beautiful, life full of ease and pleasure, and want of any kind unknown. She tried not to be envious or discontented, but it was a very natural thing that the young girls should long for pretty things, gay friends, accomplishments, and a happy life. At the King's she daily saw all she wanted, for the children's older sisters were just out, and Meg caught frequent glimpses of dainty ball dresses and bouquets, heard lively gossip about theaters, concerts, sleighing parties, and merrymakings of all kinds, and saw money lavished on trifles which would have been so precious to her. Poor Meg seldom complained, but a sense of injustice made her feel bitter toward everyone sometimes, for she had not yet learned to know how rich she was in the blessings which alone can make life happy. Jo happened to suit Aunt March, who was lame and needed an active person to wait upon her. The childless old lady had offered to adopt one of the girls when the troubles came, and was much offended because her offer was declined. Other friends told the Marches that they had lost all chance of being remembered in the rich old lady's will, but the unworldly Marches only said, "You can't give up our girls for a dozen fortunes. Rich or poor, we will keep together and be happy in one another." The old lady wouldn't speak to them for a time, but happening to meet Jo at a friend's, something in her comical face and blunt manners struck the old lady's fancy, and she proposed to take her for a companion. This did not suit Jo at all, but she accepted the place since nothing better appeared, and to everyone's surprise got on remarkably well with her irascible relative. There was an occasional tempest, and once Jo marched home declaring she couldn't bear it longer, but Aunt March always cleared up quickly and sent for her to come back again with such urgency that she could not refuse, for in her heart she rather liked the peppery old lady. I suspect that the real attraction was a large library of fine books, which was left to dust and spiders since Uncle March died. Jo remembered the kind old gentleman who used to let her build railroads and bridges with his big dictionaries, tell her stories about queer pictures in his Latin books, and buy her cards of gingerbread whenever he met her on the street. The dim, dusty room with the busts staring down from the tall bookcases, the cozy chairs, the globes, and best of all, the wilderness of books in which she could wander where she liked, made a library a region of bliss to her. The moment Aunt March took her nap or was busy with company, Jo hurried to this quiet place, and curling herself up in the easy chair, devoured poetry, romance, history, travels, and pictures like a regular bookworm. But like all happiness, it did not last long, for as sure as she had reached the heart of the story, the sweetest verse of a song, or the most perilous adventure of her traveler, a shrill voice called, "Josephine, Josephine," and she had to leave her paradise to wind yarn, wash the poodle, or read Belsham's essays by the hour together. Jo's ambition was to do something very splendid. What it was she had no idea as yet, but left it for time to tell her, and meanwhile found her greatest affliction in the fact that she couldn't read, run, and ride as much as she liked. A quick temper, sharp tongue, and restless spirit were always getting her into scrapes, and her life was a series of ups and downs, which were both comic and pathetic. But the training she received at Aunt March's was just what she needed, and the thought that she was doing something to support herself made her happy in spite of the perpetual "Josephine." Beth was too bashful to go to school. It had been tried, but she suffered so much that it was given up, and she did her lessons at home with her father. Even when he went away and her mother was called to devote her skill and energy to Soldiers' Aid Societies, Beth went faithfully on by herself and did the best she could. She was a housewifely little creature and helped Hannah keep home neat and comfortable for the workers, never thinking of any reward but to be loved. Long, quiet days she spent not lonely or idle, for her little world was peopled with imaginary friends, and she was by nature a busy bee. There were 6 dolls to be taken up and dressed every morning, For Beth was a child still and loved her pets as well as ever. Not one whole or handsome one among them. All were outcasts until Beth took them in. For when her sisters outgrew these idols, they passed to her, because Amy would have nothing old or ugly. Beth cherished them all more tenderly for that very reason, and she set up a hospital for infirm dolls. No pins were ever stuck into their cotton vitals. No harsh words or blows were ever given them. No neglect ever saddened the heart of the most repulsive, but all were fed and clothed and nursed and caressed with an affection which never failed. Once forlorn fragments of dollanity had belonged to Jo, and having led a tempestuous life which was left a wreck in the rag bag, from which dreary poorhouse it was rescued by Beth and taken up to her refuge. Having no top to its head, she tied on a neat little cap, and as both arms and legs were gone, she hid these deficiencies by folding it in a blanket and devoting her best bed to this chronic invalid. If anyone had known the care lavished on that dolly, I think it would have touched their hearts even while they laughed. She brought it bits of bouquets, she read to it, took it out to breathe fresh air hidden under her coat. She sang it lullabies, and never went to bed without kissing its dirty face and whispering tenderly, "I hope you have a good night, my poor dear." Beth had her troubles as well as the others, and not being an angel but a very human little girl, she often wept a little weep, as Jo said, because she couldn't take music lessons and have a fine piano. She loved music so dearly, tried so hard to learn, and practiced away so patiently at the jingling old instrument, that it did seem as if someone, not to hint at March, ought to help her. Nobody did, however, and nobody saw Beth wipe the tears off the yellow keys that wouldn't keep in tune when she was all alone. She sang like a little lark about her work, never was too tired for Marmee and the girls, and day after day said hopefully to herself, "I know I'll get my music sometime if I'm good." There are many Beths in the world, shy and quiet, sitting in corners till needed, and living for others so cheerfully that no one sees the sacrifices till the little cricket on the hearth stops chirping and the sweet sunshiny presence vanishes, leaving silence and shadow behind. If anybody had asked Amy what the greatest trial of her life was, she would have answered at once, "My nose." When she was a baby, Jo had accidentally dropped her into the coal hod, and Amy insisted that the fall had ruined her nose forever. It was not big nor red. It was only rather flat, and all the pinching in the world could not give it an aristocratic point. No one minded it but herself, and it was doing its best to grow, but Amy felt deeply the want of a Grecian nose, and drew whole sheets of handsome ones to console herself. Little Raphael, as her sisters called her, had a decided talent for drawing, and was never so happy as when copying flowers, designing fairies, or illustrating stories with specimens of art. Her teachers complained that instead of doing her sums, she covered her slate with animals. The blank pages of her atlas were used to copy maps on, and caricatures of the most ludicrous descriptions came fluttering out of her books at unlikely moments. She got through her lessons as well as she could, and managed to escape reprimands by being a model of deportment. She was a great favorite with her mates, being good-tempered and possessing the happy art of pleasing without effort. Her little airs and graces were much admired, and so were her accomplishments, for besides her drawing, she could play 12 tunes, crochet and read French without mispronouncing more than 2/3 of the words. She had a plaintive way of saying, "When Papa was rich, we did so-and-so," which was very touching, and her long words were considered perfectly elegant by the girls. Amy was, in a fair way, to be spoiled, for everyone petted her, and her small vanities and selfishness were growing nicely. One thing, however, rather quenched the vanities. She had to wear her cousin's clothes. Now Florence's mamma hadn't a particle of taste, and Amy suffered deeply at having to wear a red instead of a blue bonnet, unbecoming gowns, and fussy aprons that did not fit. Everything was good and well made and a little worn, but Amy's artistic eyes were much afflicted, especially this winter, when her school dress was a dull purple with yellow dots and no trimming. "My only comfort," she said to Meg with tears in her eyes, "is that Mother doesn't take tucks in my dresses whenever I'm naughty, as Maria Park's mother does. My dear, it's really dreadful. For sometimes she is so bad her frock is up to her knees and she can't come to school. When I think of this degradation, I can bear even my flat nose and purple gown with yellow skyrockets on it." Meg was Amy's confidant and monitor, and by some strange attraction of the opposites, Jo was gentle Beth's. To Jo alone did the shy child tell her thoughts, and over her big harum-scarum sister, Beth unconsciously exercised more influence than anyone in the family. The two older girls were a great deal to one another, but each took one of the younger sisters into her keeping and watched over her in her own way, playing mother, as they call it, and put their sisters in the places of discarded dolls with the maternal instinct of little women. "Has anybody got anything to tell? It's been such a dismal day, I'm really dying for some amusement," said Meg as they sat sewing together that evening. "I had a queer time with Aunt today, and as I got the best of it, I'll tell you about it," began Jo, who dearly loved to tell stories. "I was reading that everlasting Belsham and droning away as I always do, for Aunt soon drops off, and then I take out some nice book and read like fury until she wakes up. I actually made myself sleepy, and before she began to nod, I gave such a gape that she asked me what I meant by opening my mouth wide enough to take the whole book in at once. "I wish I could and be done with it," said I, trying not to be saucy. Then she gave me a long lecture on my sins and told me to sit and think them over while she just lost herself for a moment. She never finds herself very soon, so the minute her cap began to bob like a top-heavy dahlia, I whipped the Vicar of Wakefield out of my pocket and read away, with one eye on him and one eye on Aunt. I just got to where they all tumbled into the water when I forgot and laughed out loud. Aunt woke up, and being more good-natured after her nap, told me to read a little bit and show what frivolous work I preferred to the worthy and instructive Belsham. Did my very best, and she liked it, though she only said, "I don't understand what it's all about. Go back and begin it, child." Back I went, and made the primroses as interesting as ever I could. Once I was wicked enough to stop in a thrilling place and say meekly, "I'm afraid it tires you, ma'am. Shan't I stop now?" She caught up her knitting, which had dropped out of her hands, gave me a sharp look through her specs, and said in her short way, "Finish the chapter and don't be impertinent, miss." "Did she own like she liked it?" asked Meg. "Oh, bless you, no," but she let old Belsham rest, and when I ran back after my gloves this afternoon, there she was, so hard at the Vicar that she didn't hear me laugh as I danced a jig in the hall because of the good time coming. What a pleasant life she might have if only she chose. I don't envy her much in spite of her money, for all rich people have about as many worries as poor ones, I think, added Joe. That reminds me, said Meg, that I've got something to tell. It isn't funny like Joe's story, but I thought about it a good deal as I came home. At the King's today, I found everybody in a flurry, and one of the children said that her oldest brother had done something dreadful and Papa had sent him away. I heard Mrs. King crying and Mr. King talking very loud, and Grace and Ellen turned away their faces when they passed me so I shouldn't see how red and swollen their eyes were. I didn't ask any questions, of course, but I felt so sorry for them and was rather glad I hadn't had any wild brothers to do wicked things and disgrace the family. I think being disgraced in school is a great deal tryinger than anything bad boys can do, said Amy, shaking her head, as if her experience of life had been a deep one. Susie Perkins came to school today with a lovely red carnelian ring. I wanted it dreadfully and wished I was her with all my might. Well, she drew a picture of Mr. Davis with a monstrous nose and a hump and the words, "Young ladies, my eye is upon you," coming out of his mouth in a balloon thing. We were laughing over it when all of a sudden his eye was on us, and he ordered Susie to bring up her slate. She was paralyzed with fright, but she went. And oh, what do you think he did? He took her by the ear. Just fancy how horrid. And led her to the recitation platform and made her stand there half an hour holding the slate so everyone could see. Didn't the girls laugh at the picture? Asked Joe, who relished the scrape. Laugh? Not one. They sat still as mice, and Susie cried quarts. I know she did. I didn't envy her then, for I felt millions of carnelian rings wouldn't have made me happy after that. I never should have gotten over such an agonizing mortification. And Amy went on her work in the proud consciousness of virtue and the successful utterance of 2 long words in a breath. I saw something I liked this morning, and I meant to tell it at dinner, but I forgot, said Beth, putting Joe's topsy-turvy basket in order as she talked. When I went to get some oysters for Hannah, Mr. Lawrence was in the fish shop, but he didn't see me, for I kept behind the fish barrel, and he was busy with Mr. Cutter, the fishman. A poor woman came in with a pail and a mop, and asked Mr. Cutter if he would let her do some scrubbing for a bit of fish, because she hadn't any dinner for her children and had been disappointed of her day's work. Mr. Cutter was in a hurry and said no rather crossly, so she was going away looking hungry and sorry when Mr. Lawrence hooked up a big fish with the crooked end of his cane and held it out to her. She was so glad and surprised, she took it right into her arms and thanked him over and over. He told her to go along and cook it, and she hurried off so happy. Wasn't it good of him? Oh, she did look so funny hugging the big slippery fish and hoping Mr. Lawrence's bed in heaven would be easy. When they had heard Beth's story and asked their mother for one, after a moment's thought, she said soberly, "As I sat cutting out blue flannel jackets today at the rooms, I felt very anxious about Father and thought how lonely and helpless we should be if anything happened to him. It was not a wise thing to do, but I kept on worrying till an old man came in with an order for some clothes. He sat down near me and I began to talk to him, for he looked poor and tired and anxious. 'Have you any sons in the army?' I asked, for the note he brought was not to me. 'Yes, ma'am. I had 4, but 2 were killed. One is a prisoner, and I'm going to the other, who is very sick in a Washington hospital,' he answered quietly. "You have done a great deal for your country, sir," I said, feeling respect now instead of pity. "Not a mite more than I ought, ma'am. I'd go myself if I was any use. As I ain't, I give my boys and give 'em free." He spoke so cheerfully, looked so sincere, and seemed so glad to give his all that I was ashamed of myself. I'd given one man and thought it too much, while he gave 4 without grudging them. I had all my girls to comfort me at home, and his last son was waiting miles away to say goodbye to him, perhaps. I felt so rich, so happy, thinking of my blessings, that I made him a nice bundle, gave him some money, and thanked him heartily for the lesson he had taught me. "Tell another story, Mother, one with a moral to it, like this. I like to think about them afterwards, if they are real and not too preachy," said Joe after a minute's silence. Mrs. March smiled and began at once, for she had told stories to this little audience for many years and knew how to please them. "Once upon a time there were 4 girls who had enough to eat and drink and wear, and a good many comforts and pleasures, kind friends and parents who loved them dearly, and yet they were not contented." Here the listeners stole sly looks at one another and began to sew diligently. These girls were anxious to be good and made many excellent resolutions, but they did not keep them very well, and were constantly saying, "If only we had this," or "if only we could do that," quite forgetting how much they already had and how many things they could actually do. So they asked an old woman what spell they could use to make them happy, and she said, "When you feel discontented, think over your blessings and be grateful." Here Joe looked up quickly as if about to speak, but changed her mind, seeing that the story was not done yet. Being sensible girls, they decided to try her advice and soon were surprised to see how well off they were. One discovered that money couldn't keep shame and sorrow out of rich people's houses. Another, that though she was poor, she was a great deal happier with her youth, health, and good spirits than a certain fretful, feeble old lady who couldn't enjoy her comforts. A third that, disagreeable as it was to help get dinner, it was harder still to go begging for it. And the fourth, that even carnelian rings were not so valuable as good behavior. So they agreed to stop complaining, to enjoy the blessings already possessed, and try to deserve them, lest they should be taken away entirely instead of increased. And I believe they were never disappointed or sorry that they took the old woman's advice. "Now, Marmee, that is very cunning of you to turn our own stories against us and give us a sermon instead of a romance," cried Meg. "I like that kind of sermon. It's the sort Father used to tell us," said Beth thoughtfully, putting the needles straight on Joe's cushion. "I don't complain near as much as the others do, and I shall be more careful than ever now, for I've had warning from Susie's downfall," said Amy morally. "We needed that lesson and won't forget it," said Joe. Chapter 5. Being Neighborly. "What in the world are you going to do now, Joe?" asked Meg one snowy afternoon, as her sister came tramping through the halls in rubber boots, old sack, and hood, with a broom in one hand and a shovel in the other. "Going out for exercise," answered Joe with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. "I should think 2 long walks this morning would have been quite enough. It's cold and dull out, and I advise you to stay warm and dry by the fire as I did," said Meg with a shiver. "Never take advice. Can't keep still all day, and not being a pussycat, I don't like to doze by the fire. I like adventures, and I'm going to find some." Meg went back to toast her feet and read Ivanhoe, and Joe began to dig paths with great energy. The snow was light, and with her broom she soon swept a path all around the garden for Beth to walk in the sun when she came out and the invalid dolls needed air. Now the garden separated the Marches' house from that of Mr. Lawrence. Both stood in a suburb of the city, which was still country-like with groves and lawns, large gardens, and quiet streets. A low hedge parted the two estates. On one side was an old brown house, looking rather bare and shabby, robbed of the vines that in summer covered its walls and the flowers which then surrounded it. On the other side was a stately stone mansion plainly betokening every sort of comfort and luxury, from the big coach house and well-kept grounds to the conservatory and the glimpses of lovely things one caught between the rich curtains. Yet it seemed a lonely, lifeless sort of house, for no children frolicked on the lawn, no motherly face ever smiled at the windows, and few people went in and out except the old gentleman and his grandson. To Joe's lively fancy, this fine house seemed a kind of enchanted palace, full of splendors and delights which no one enjoyed. She had long wanted to behold these hidden glories and to know the Lawrence boy, who looked as if he would like to be known, if only he knew how to begin. Since the party, she had been more eager than ever, and had planned many ways of making friends with him, but had not seen him lately, and Joe began to think he had gone away, when one day spied a brown face at an upper window looking wistfully down into their garden, where Beth and Amy were snowballing one another. "That boy is suffering for society and fun," she said to herself. "His grandpa doesn't know what's good for him and keeps him shut up all alone. He needs a party of jolly boys to play with or somebody young and lively. I've a great mind to go over and tell the old gentleman so." The idea amused Joe, who liked to do daring things and was always scandalizing Meg by her queer performances. The plan of going over was not forgotten, and when the snowy afternoon came, Joe resolved to try what could be done. She saw Mr. Lawrence drive off, and then sallied out to dig her way down to the hedge, where she paused and took a survey. All quiet, curtains down at the lower windows, servants out of sight, and nothing human visible but a curly black head leaning on a thin hand at the upper window. "There he is," thought Joe, "poor boy, all alone and sick this dismal day. It's a shame. I'll toss up a snowball and make him look out, and then say a kind word to him." Up went a handful of soft snow, and the head turned at once, showing a face which lost its listless look in a minute. As the big eyes brightened and the mouth began to smile, Joe nodded and laughed and flourished her broom as she called out, "How do you do? Are you sick?" Laurie opened the window and croaked out as hoarsely as a raven, "Better, thank you. I've had a bad cold and been shut up a week." "I'm sorry. What do you do to amuse yourself with?" "Nothing. It's been dull as tombs up here." "Don't you read?" "Not much. They won't let me." "Can't someone read to you?" "Grandpa does sometimes, but my books don't interest him and I hate to ask Brooke all the time." "Have someone come and see you then." "There isn't anyone I'd like to see. Boys make such a row and my head is weak." "Isn't there some nice girl who'd read and amuse you? Girls are quiet, like to play nurse." "Don't know any." "You know us," began Joe, then laughed and stopped. "So I do. Will you come, please?" cried Laurie. "Well, I'm not quiet and nice, but I'll come if Mother will let me. I'll go ask her. Shut the window like a good boy and wait till I come." With that, Jo shouldered her broom and marched into the house, wondering what they would all say to her. Laurie was in a flutter of excitement at the idea of having company and flew about to get ready, for as Mrs. March said, he was a little gentleman and did honor the coming guest by brushing his curly pate, putting on a fresh color, and trying to tidy up the room, which in spite of half a dozen servants was anything but neat. Presently there came a loud ring, then a decided voice asking for Mr. Laurie, and a surprised-looking servant came running up to announce a young lady. And I think that is a good place for us to stop for tonight. We'll pick this up again in the next episode. And so, the angels and I wish you sweet dreams. You rest now and know that you are loved, and we are so deeply grateful for the gift of you.